The porch light was off. That's the detail I keep returning to. Not the locked door. Not the temperature, 41 degrees at 6:14 in the evening in late October. Not the fact that my son was sitting on the top step with his knees pulled to his chest and his jacket unzipped because he never remembers to zip it, because he's 7. It's that someone had to reach over and flip that switch off. That was a choice. His name is Oleander. We call him Ollie. He had a library book in his lap, The Complete Guide to North American Birds, the one with the taped spine he'd checked out 4 times in a row. And when my headlights swept across the porch, he looked up, and he didn't cry. He just said, "I knew you were coming." He was right. I always come. Welcome to Calm Revenge Tales. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened next. If stories about quiet people finally being seen find something in you, subscribe before we go any further. Justice doesn't rush, but it does arrive. My name is Sergeant Priya Okonkwo Halstead, United States Army Reserve, and for 11 years before that, I was a licensed structural engineer at a firm in Columbus, Ohio. I bought my house on Meridian Street at 31, with no co-signer, no family loan, no inheritance. I drive a 2018 Chevy Silverado that I maintain myself. I cook from scratch because takeout at the frequency I eat it would cost me $400 a month that I'd rather put toward Ollie's college fund. Ollie came to me 3 years ago. He is my sister Darmina's son. Darmina is 11 years younger than me and has been in and out of residential treatment since Ollie was 18 months old. I have full legal guardianship. I did not ask my parents to help me get it, and they did not offer. What they offered, when Ollie started living with me, was opinions. He was too loud. He asked too many questions. He didn't sit still at the table. He called birds by their scientific names at dinner. And my father found it disrespectful, though he couldn't explain exactly why. I found it extraordinary. Ollie once stopped dead in the middle of a parking lot to identify a cedar waxwing by its call alone. He tugged my sleeve and whispered, "Bombacillus cedrorum," like he was telling me a secret. We missed the movie. We stood there for 4 minutes watching it in a bare tree until it flew. I have never been late for anything that mattered more. The invitation came in September, through my mother, via text, and it arrived with conditions attached like luggage tags. The occasion was my father's 70th birthday dinner. The conditions were that we arrive before 5:30, that Ollie behave appropriately, and that I not bring up, and here she used the phrase she always uses, the whole situation with Darmina. There was a 4th condition, embedded in a postscript, almost casual. Could Ollie perhaps sit at the kids' table in the den rather than the main dining room? My nephew Bryson would be there. Bryson is 15 and hasn't spoken to Ollie voluntarily since the Christmas he told Ollie that birds were boring animals for boring people. I said yes. I said yes because my father was turning 70, and because Ollie had spent 2 weeks making him a birthday card. A watercolor of a northern cardinal, Cardinalis cardinalis, rendered with the kind of patience that makes adults embarrassed by their own impatience. He'd asked me 3 times if it was good enough. I told him it was better than good enough. I told him it was precise. I should have read the luggage tags more carefully. We arrived at 4:58. My mother opened the door and looked at Ollie's card and said, "Oh, how sweet," in a voice she uses for things that will be placed on the refrigerator for 2 days, and then quietly moved to the recycling. My father looked at the card and said, "What kind of bird is that?" Ollie said, "A northern cardinal. The male has red plumage for attracting mates. The female is brown so she doesn't get spotted by predators when she's sitting on the nest." My father looked at me. I looked back. The dinner itself was a long table, 12 people, a roasted pork loin that my Aunt Celestine had driven 4 hours to prepare. The table was set for 11. I counted twice. Ollie was in the den. I brought him a plate. He was reading his bird book. He said, "It's okay, Aunt Priya. Bryson showed me how to find the football channel." He did not watch football. He watched it anyway, because he is 7 and he was trying to make something work. At 6:03, I heard the back door. I wasn't certain at first. It's a house I grew up in, and the sounds of it are layered into something I don't consciously parse anymore. But then I heard the click of the deadbolt. The heavy one, the one you have to lift the handle to engage. And I heard Bryson's laugh from the kitchen. And I did the math in a single breath. I walked to the back door. Locked. I walked to the front door. Locked. I walked to the living room and said, "Where is Ollie?" My mother said, "He wanted some fresh air." My Aunt Celestine put her fork down. My father said, "The boy was standing at the back door every 5 minutes. It was disruptive." I said, "He's 7. He was looking for me." My mother said, "He needs to learn that he can't just interrupt adults." I said, "It's 40 degrees. Nobody moved. 12 people at a table, and nobody moved." Celestine looked at her plate. My cousin Renata looked at the wall. My Uncle Marcus almost said something. His mouth opened, his chair shifted, and then he closed it again. I unlocked the front door. Ollie was on the top step with his bird book and his unzipped jacket. And when my headlights found him, he said, "I knew you were coming." I zipped his jacket. I picked up the bird book. I said, "Come on, buddy. We're going home." He said, "What about dessert?" I said, "We'll make our own." We left. Not because I was punished. Because I chose to go. There is a difference, and I knew it, and I held on to it the whole drive home. That night I made him a crepe. One crepe folded in thirds, dusted with powdered sugar, with sliced strawberries along the edge. He sat on the kitchen counter while I made it, the way he always does, talking about the cedar waxwing he'd seen in the schoolyard that week, and I listened, and the kitchen was warm, and the distance between that kitchen and my parents' house felt like the right size. The next morning, I called my mother. I told her what had happened would not happen again. I did not raise my voice. I told her that if we visited, Ollie would sit where I sat, eat when I ate, and be spoken to the way I expected him to be spoken to. I told her these were not requests. She said, "You're making this into something it isn't." I said, "I know what it is." The weeks that followed had a cost. 30 minutes of additional commute, because I switched Ollie's school to one closer to the base. $80 a month for a sitter on drill weekends. A conversation with Ollie's teacher, Ms. Ferreira, about the fact that he'd become quieter in class, more watchful. I noted it. I adjusted. I bought a second-hand spotting scope from a birder's estate sale, $65, and we set it up on the back porch and kept a log in a green composition notebook. The notebook. That's the thing. I should tell you about the notebook. Ollie started it the week after the birthday dinner. He'd decided he wanted to be a field ornithologist, and field ornithologists keep logs. Date, time, location, species, behavior, conditions. He filled 4 pages that first week in his blocky, careful handwriting. He pressed a single cedar waxwing feather to the inside back cover with a piece of clear tape and wrote underneath it, "Found on Meridian Street, October 29th. My parents called twice in November. Both times the conversation arrived eventually at the same destination. If I was struggling with the guardianship situation, there were family members who might be better positioned. My Aunt Celestine's house had more space. My cousin Renata and her husband had more stability. The word stability was used 4 times across 2 calls as though it were a technical term I lacked credentials to understand. I said Ollie was not a situation to be repositioned. I said it the first time plainly, and the second time I didn't say it at all. I just waited until the sentence was finished, and said I had to go. What I didn't say, either time, was what sat inside a manila envelope in the back of my filing cabinet. I didn't say it because I didn't know yet what it meant. I'd received it in August, 3 weeks before the birthday invitation. A letter from an attorney named Dowelachike in Cincinnati, representing the estate of my great-uncle Fenwick Okonkwo Abra, who had died in July at 89 and who I had met, in total, 4 times in my life. The letter said there would be a reading of the will in January. It said I was named. I put it in the filing cabinet and I didn't think much about it, because Ollie had his first real fever that week and I had a structural assessment due on Friday, and there are only so many things a person can hold at once. If you're still with me, and I hope you are, because this is where the weight of it starts to show, subscribe now. Whatever comes next, you'll want to be here when it lands. Ollie got quieter in December. Not sad exactly. He still woke up at 6:15 to check the feeder, still narrated the behavior of the Junkos with the seriousness of a documentarian, but there was something in him that was working through something. One evening he asked me, while we were doing dishes, "Did your mom and dad love you when you were little?" I handed him a dry bowl. I said, "I think they loved the idea of me." He thought about that for a moment, turning the bowl over in his hands. Then he said, "I love the real you." I ran the water a little longer than I needed to. In the second week of January, I drove to Cincinnati. I sat across a conference table from Dowlachike, who was methodical and quiet, and had the kind of stillness that comes from delivering news to families for 30 years. He slid a document toward me across the table. Fenwick Okonkwo Abra had no children. He had, over the course of 40 years, accumulated a commercial property portfolio in Cincinnati and Dayton. 8 buildings, managed quietly, appreciated substantially. Total appraised value, $2.3 million. He had left it entirely to me. There was a letter attached in Fenwick's handwriting, shaky but legible. He wrote that he had watched our family for decades. He wrote that he had seen who built and who took credit for building. He wrote that he had read, through my mother's Christmas letters, about the girl who became an engineer and then a soldier and then a guardian. And he had decided that what he had built should go to someone who would not mistake it for luck. The manila envelope was sitting on the table in front of me. The same one from my filing cabinet. I'd brought it without knowing I'd need it. I read the letter twice. Then I called my mother, because there was going to be a second reading. A formal family meeting at Achike's office in 2 weeks, and she deserved to know before she walked into it. She said, "What did he leave?" I told her. There was a silence that I had no name for. It moved through the phone like weather. She said, "Fenwick always did have a soft spot for you." I said, "His letter says otherwise." The family meeting was a Tuesday. 12 people, different 12 than the birthday dinner. My parents. 4 of my father's siblings. 3 cousins. My Aunt Celestine, who arrived early and sat beside me without being asked. Dowlachike read the will aloud with the same measured pace he'd used with me, and the room changed temperature as the numbers moved through it. I watched my father's hands go still on the table. I watched my mother's face compose itself into something that was not grief but was performing it. My cousin Renata made a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a question. My father said, loudly, that there had to be an error. That Fenwick wouldn't have done this without consulting the family. That he, specifically, had maintained a relationship with Fenwick for decades. Achike said, with no change in pace, that the will had been drawn up 18 months ago, revised once, and witnessed properly. He said there was no basis for a contest. My uncle Marcus, the one who almost spoke at the dinner table, the one who shifted in his chair and closed his mouth, looked at the table. His face had something in it that I recognized. Not shame for what had been done to Ollie specifically. Shame for the pattern he had watched for years and participated in by being quiet. That's a different kind of shame. Smaller maybe, but it lasts longer. My mother turned to me and said, "After everything we did for you." I didn't answer that directly. I reached into my bag, and I placed Ollie's green composition notebook on the conference table, right in the center, next to the will. No one knew what it was. I said, "Ollie started keeping this the week after your husband locked him outside in 41-degree weather. He's filled 3 of them now. Last week he identified a painted bunting in our backyard. That's genuinely rare for Ohio, and he wrote 4 paragraphs about it in his own words." I let that sit. Then I said, "He told me once that he loved the real me." I didn't know what real meant in that sentence until I read Fenwick's letter. Fenwick said he watched who built things. Ollie has been building something since he was 4 years old. He just needed someone to notice. My mother said, "This isn't about Oleander." I said, "It never was for you. That's exactly what Fenwick's letter says." Ollie had died in November. Not dramatically. He had a heart condition we'd known about for a year, an arrhythmia that had worsened quietly, and on a Tuesday morning at 7:42, he sat down on the porch to watch the feeder, and simply didn't get up. He was 8 years old and 4 months. He had a feather taped to the inside back cover of his bird log, and he had said once, while we were doing dishes, "I love the real you," and I would carry that sentence in my sternum for the rest of my life like a structural load I'd chosen to bear. I was in uniform the day he died, because I'd come home early from a drill weekend. The duty officer had called. I'd driven 90 miles in 84 minutes, and I walked up the porch steps in my ACUs, and I sat down next to him. And the feeder was full and 3 cedar waxwings were eating from it like it was an ordinary Tuesday. He was right that I would come. I just didn't come in time. The properties transferred in March. I established a trust for Darmina's future care, and set aside a scholarship fund at Ollie's school. The Oleander Okonkwo Halstead Award for Scientific Curiosity, $500 a year, for a student who asks more questions than the curriculum can hold. My parents' attorney sent a letter contesting the will. A Chaik responded with documentation. The contest was dismissed in 6 weeks. The phrase my parents had used to characterize my guardianship, the whole situation, appeared verbatim in my father's written objection, and a Chaik referenced it in his response as evidence of the family's characterization of the beneficiary's household. The word they'd used as a diminishment became, in a legal brief, evidence of their bias. I offered, through a Chaik, to establish a small monthly distribution from the rental income to my parents, conditional on no further legal action. They refused. I was not surprised. I was not relieved, either, exactly. I was done. My Aunt Celestine calls on Sundays. We cook the same thing sometimes. She'll call me and say she's making a goosey soup, and I'll say I already have the melon seeds soaking and we'll laugh about it across 300 miles. She came to Ollie's memorial and she held my hand and she didn't say a word for 40 minutes, and I have never needed anything more than that. The green composition notebook is on my kitchen windowsill. I've been adding to it. I'm not a field ornithologist. I don't have the patience for the taxonomy the way Ollie did. But I keep the log. Date, time, location, species, behavior, conditions. Last Tuesday a painted bunting appeared at the feeder again. Same as the one Ollie recorded. I wrote 4 paragraphs. I used his format exactly. He asked me once if his card was good enough. I told him it was precise. I meant it the way he would have understood it. Precision is a form of love. It's paying close enough attention that the thing you're describing knows it was really seen. He was really seen. Thank you for staying with this one. Some stories don't resolve the way we want. They resolve the way they must. What Ollie gave me couldn't be taken in a will, and it couldn't be locked outside on a 41-degree porch. It was already mine because he said so. If there's a child in your life who is being reduced to a situation by someone with the power to do otherwise, go be precise about them today. Tell them what you notice. Use the scientific name if you have to. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, and leave a comment telling me about someone you see clearly. I'll see you in the next one.